I tell this story as it happened in Brazil. The cornbread, the lace cloth, the neighborhood thrift shop, though the heart of it could have played out anywhere. He stood in the kitchen doorway holding a thrift store bag that quivered in his hands like a little animal. It was my 60th birthday, the kind of day you imagine being ordinary until it isn't. I had woken early to make a simple cake, the kind my mother used to make, nothing fancy. Cornmeal, a little sugar, a pinch of salt. The house smelled like warm crumbs and butter. The lamp on the small table hummed the same gentle light it always did at night. For years I had kept that lamp on when Geraldo came home late from work, so he would find me awake and the house still ours. We were not people who marked birthdays with extravagance. We marked them with rituals. A neat lace cloth spread across the table, a single candle, the soft slap of a wooden spoon as I stirred coffee. There were a dozen small economies that added up to survival. 1,000 tiny refusals. The bus ride we walked instead of paid. The cut-up cheese when we couldn't buy fresh. We had learned to make dignity out of what was left over. Geraldo had been out most of the week doing odd jobs, fixing a gate for a neighbor, helping a small construction crew lay tile, anything that brought in a little extra. He carried the faint scent of cement and sweat on his hands, and his shirt still showed the patch of dust where he had knelt that morning. He was the sort of man who measured his worth by the work he brought home. He had always wanted to protect me from shame. When he came in, the bag was clutched to his chest as if it were a treasure chest too heavy for his small brown hands. He tried to hide how much he had spent, though I could see the way his fingers worried the edge of the bag. I smiled, the way you smile to tell someone, without words, that their modesty is beautiful. He put the bag on the table. It made a kind of weak rustling sound. "Happy birthday," he said. His voice was thin with something like apology and hope all at once. I had learned over the years how to take his offerings without making him feel small. I reached in and pulled out an old leather purse, soft with use. The leather cracked at the corners like an old book. It looked like something you found folded into coat pockets at the market, its zipper stubborn. He had bought it from a thrift shop down the lane, the kind of place where things waited for the next life. Before I could say anything, Sandra arrived. Sandra was Geraldo's sister, always polished, always with a precise opinion ready. She lived in a building that had a doorman and sometimes took pleasure in measuring people by the gloss of their shoes. She had a way of smiling that arrived before the kindness did, like a curtain lifted and the light was already set. When she came through the door, she handed me a hug like a performance and then looked at the purse. "Oh," she said, holding the word out like a verdict, "is that what you call a present?" Her voice had the soft edge of someone who is used to having a larger life without having to reach for it. "It looks used." Laughter bubbled from somewhere in the room, and I remember the way the air tightened. Even the lamp seemed to dim. Geraldo's shoulders shrank. He retreated to the corner near the sink, hands in his pockets, smiling through it and failing. Shame is a small sound, and when it lives inside a man, his movements learn to hide it. I could have defended him with words that would make them stop. I could have matched her jibe with a retort sharp enough to cut pride cleanly off. Instead, I found a quieter way. I put the purse down and lifted the cake between both hands, the smell of warm corn and butter rising. "Come, eat," I said. "Sit, it's hot." My voice was steady. I think they could feel the steadiness like a plate set down in the center of the table. Sandra made a face as though the cake did not belong on her tongue. She murmured about how she had just come from a place where they serve macarons and champagne. She put her handbag on her lap as if to protect it. There is a choreography to condescension, a trained tilt of head, a soft laugh, a look that lists your life and finds it wanting. I watched Geraldo sit smaller than he had 30 minutes before. After they left, the house felt too big for all the small things we were. The neighbors had gone, the sound of the street returned like rain in the distance. Geraldo sat at the table, staring into the cup of coffee he never finished. I went to him with the cake plate in my hands and set it down without fanfare. He swallowed. The lines around his mouth matched the dust on his arms. "I'm sorry," he said before I could speak. It was not an apology for the purse. It was an apology for being poor in a world that values newness like virtue. "Don't be," I told him. "I meant it. You gave me what you could." He looked up at me, and for a moment, his face was a child's again, open, raw, as if the world had folded a paper fortune and given him a crack to see the future. He stopped. The rest was a memory. He had wanted to buy me something that would make me sit straighter, that would make the people on the street look at us and not at the edges. We cleaned the purse together. That is how it started. A small domestic ritual that lets you touch what people have handled before. I ran a cloth under warm water, wiped at the leather with slow, careful movements. Old perfume rose up, a faint floral that smelled like other houses. Inside the purse, tucked into a corner where no hand would normally reach, something metallic brushed my finger. I froze. It was late, the kind of late that is both honest and cruel. Geraldo was wiping his face with a napkin. I could tell 1,000 stories in one soundless breath, and in all of them, I had to choose between letting hope live and saving him from it. The thing was small, a key, polished, the metal cool against my skin. It had a tiny metal plate attached to the ring, an oval so well worked that I felt it should have always been there, waiting. On the plate, someone had engraved 2 words, Confianza, and beneath it a number, 304. The word hit me like warm water. Confianza, trust. The number felt like a name. I had never seen a key that asked for faith like that. For a moment I did not move. The house held its breath. The lamp threw a pool of yellow light over the table, and the key caught it and sent back a thin, bright line. "Where did you find that?" Geraldo asked, confused at the way my hands trembled. "In the purse," I said. It was the simplest answer, and also the most dangerous. I closed my hand around the key, feeling the weight of it, how it fit into a place where my palm remembered other keys. Keys to rented rooms, to small cupboards, to the back door into a yard where we once hid things. The key did not look like much. Keys rarely do. They are jewelry for the future. That night, I did not sleep. I put the key on the nightstand and stared at it while the house made its familiar sounds. The clock in the hallway, the neighbor's dog barking twice, the old fan brushing the air. I thought of everything I knew about thrift shops. How people sell pieces of their life to get rid of what they no longer need. How some items are given second chances. What I did not know was why anyone would sew a key into a purse. Hope is tricky. It has a way of arriving like a small animal, quiet and hesitant, curled under the bed. You learn to treat it gently because you remember what happens when it is startled. It runs away. I was tempted to wake Geraldo, to tell him there might be a miracle tucked inside scuffed leather. His face would have brightened, then bowed under the weight of wanting a life for me he couldn't guarantee on his wages alone. I saw him at the sink the next morning, shaving slowly, the same quiet man with the same tired hands. I thought about the look on Sandra's face, the way she measured us. I thought about Senior. Almeida, our landlord, who had been patient and then not recently, a man whose patience came with the cost of small threats, a man who had once sent a note about rent and then another with his signature pressed harder. Rent was not a storybook villain, it was a hunger with a proper letterhead. No, I decided, I would not wake him with a hope that could be taken away. I would be careful. I would go back to the thrift shop quietly and return whatever belonged to someone else. That felt like the right thing to do. Honesty is a habit you can polish, like leather. But I held the key all night. My fingers remembered every small thing we had denied ourselves for years. The evenings I washed his shirts by hand, because the laundry woman was a luxury. The months I ate the bread after it had gone a day old. I remembered his shoulder, how it had held up a small roof for decades. There is an economy of love where every small coin counts for more than grand gestures. I had learned the language of survival with him. We had grown a quiet dignity out of it. In the morning I found myself making lists. Practical things. Call the landlord, buy medicine for my knee, take the cake plate back to the neighbor who had loaned it. But the list never quite reached the key on the table. The key remembered me the way a memory remembers a face. Before I left, I wrapped it in a scrap of cloth and put it inside my apron pocket. It was there to warm my hands as I walked, a secret that hummed against my thigh. I walked to the thrift shop with my steps measured, and my heart kept like a coin in my mouth. The shop sat on a narrow street, the kind where the sun came through in bars, and the shop smelled of polish and old paper. The owner, Donna Clara, was a woman with hair like iron wool and eyes that had learned to recognize the honest in people. The bell over the door jingled like someone calling attention to the smallness of the world. She looked up from sweeping and gave me one of those looks she saves for customers and neighbors alike. Then her face softened because she knew me. We had traded small things for years. I was not the kind of person who took things the thrift shop put down for pennies. Sometimes I took a vase, sometimes I left money behind. The shop was more than a business. It was a place where objects remembered other hands. I planned to say I had taken the purse by mistake and wanted to return it. That was the truth and a way to let what belonged to someone else be returned without fanfare. But when I opened my mouth, my voice found the wrong part of the story. And I said instead, I found something inside an old purse. Donna Clara's broom stopped. For a moment she did not speak. I watched her face move through the small gears of thought. Surprise, then a guarded interest that is almost professional. Like someone seeing the first line of a book and guessing at the ending. "What did you find?" she asked. I drew out the cloth and held up the key. The metal caught the shop light. A slatted beam painted it with bars. For a breath she did not move. "You brought it back," she said, as if the act of returning it already passed some test in her eyes. She took the key with careful fingers. Her face became a map of memories I did not have. The kind of look a person gets who has handled other people's lives for years. "Who did it belong to?" I asked. I tried not to sound eager. The truth is, the key had already rearranged the furniture of my imagination. Where there had been walls before, their outlines seemed suddenly possible to scale. Donna Clara's mouth made a small line. "Antonietta," she said. The name landed in the shop like a coin falling. She left a lot of things when she passed, fine things, odd things. This purse was one of them. Antonietta. The name belonged to someone who kept her own hours and paid her own bills in secret. Everyone knew someone like that. A widow with a tidy closet of secrets. A woman who kept envelopes for rainy seasons that never came. People like that tend to leave neatness in their wake. "Why would she?" I began, but she cut me off with a look that said secrets have better timing than questions. "She was eccentric," Donna Clara said. She said it with affection, not scorn. "She liked tests." "Tests?" "Yes." Donna Clara's hands folded around the key as if it were already a story in the making. "She used to say that people change when they choose the right small thing." She paused, the broom bristle ticking the floor. "She asked me once, years ago, to keep an eye on a few things when she couldn't. I promised." My heart tripped. There are moments when the world slants, and everything you think you know becomes a lighter shade. I felt the air odd and thin. "Did she leave a note?" My voice shook with something between hope and shame. It felt foolish to want a letter that could explain the sudden rearrangement of life. Donna Clara nodded slowly. "Not here," she said. "Not for every piece. But we keep records. Sometimes a thing carries a name, sometimes a number. People come back, sometimes they don't. But a key, keys are dangerous. They don't belong on their own." I wanted to ask more. I wanted to push my hand into the seam of the world and bring out the rest. But the thrift shop was a place of slow truths. You waited for them the way you wait for rain. I left with the key wrapped in the cloth and a head full of half-questions. Back home, I set the key on the table and watched it as if it might move. The day folded into evening and then into night. I made a list of things that would be done if the key opened the right door. Rent paid, a small stack of bills taken care of, a visit to the doctor for my knee so I would stop limping when I walked down the market stairs. Each item on the list felt like a pebble I might toss into a pond, watching the circles spread. Geraldo came home later, smelling of the street and of work. He sat without asking, and took the key from my apron pocket when I handed it to him, turning it in his fingers like a man who understands tools more than treasures. "If it is something," he said softly, "if it is nothing, it is nothing, Marietta. You will not let it break you." "You do not understand," I said, because I did not want him to carry the risk of hope alone. I wanted to own the danger and the possibility so that his shoulders might rest. I might go back. "We will be careful." He looked at me then, and his eyes were tired, but the edges had a new light. "Whatever you decide, we decide together." We had married with borrowed things and a handful of promises. We had kept each other through years with no fanfare. He had always been the man who would trade his comfort so I might have mine. I thought of how he had shuffled his wages into envelopes, how he had stayed up at night fixing the leak in the roof so the rain would not wake me. He had always given what he could to keep the world stable under us. That night, I slept with the key under my pillow. It felt too large to tuck away like a secret. It felt too small to become the thing that rearranged us. I dreamt of doors that were actually windows, and locks that opened to rooms where long-forgotten things stood waiting. When I woke, the sky was the hard blue of a city that has learned to expect surprises. I made coffee. I did the small things, sweeping, putting out the cloth, tying the apron string. But my hands had a second job, to hold the thought of the key steady while the day moved around it. I thought of the landlord, Senor Almeida, and how his letters had started coming in firmer. I thought of the pills I could not afford, and the small meals counted out like alms. There is a moment before making a decision where every possible outcome hangs in the air like clothes on a line. You see what could rain down. I had talked myself into returning the purse, into being honest and small, and then I had talked myself into keeping the key, into seeing if the world might tilt. Both choices felt moral. Both felt dangerous. I told Geraldo I would go back to the thrift shop, not to boast or to hope, but to ask quietly what the right thing to do would be. I wanted to look at the woman who had given up that purse and ask her why it had been sewn with a secret. I wanted to know whether the universe had the decency to reward an honest return. As I left, the purse sat on the table like a mute friend. I touched its worn strap as if giving it a farewell nothing but kinship could hold. If this kind of true life turnaround moves you, tap like and subscribe for more stories. I promise we'll stay with the small truths, those that matter most. Walking the lane, the sun cut across the street in hard slices. People were at their shops, selling fruit, sweeping stoops. The world was ordinary and generous in its ordinariness. The thrift shop bell jingled again as I opened the door. Donna Clara looked up, and for a moment I thought she might be smiling. Then her face, which had the discretion of an old ledger, told me she had something to tell that could not wait for politeness or small talk. She reached for the broom and set it aside. "You came back," she said, and there was a softness in the way she said it, as if the words themselves were part of a larger pattern she had been watching for a long time. I handed her the key. She took it and turned it in her fingers like someone who had read a line of a story and wanted to find the paragraph that followed. Her eyes met mine, and there was an invitation there. No guarantee, only history. "Come sit," she said. "There are a few things you should hear." She led me to a chipped table at the back of the shop where old curtains hung like the drapes of another life. The shop smelled of old paper and lemon oil. She reached under the counter and brought out a folder tied with a faded ribbon. Her hands paused and she placed the folder between us. I did not yet know how many lives had been waiting inside that folder. I did not know whether a key could unbind history. I only knew that the air had changed and that whatever answer I received would not simply be a number on a brass tag. It would be a decision that could alter mornings and nights, the way bread was cut and the way smiles were shared. My life, which for decades had been stitched along the modest seam of what we could afford, now trembled at a hinge. Donna Clara opened the folder and took out a folded paper, an envelope with a wax seal, something that seemed like it belonged to a past that still had manners. She did not yet unfold it. Instead, she looked at me and said very softly, "Antonietta liked to test people," she would say. "Give me your trust, and I will tell you what you're worth." I took a breath that felt both deep and brave. "What kind of test?" I asked. Donna Clara's fingers stroked the envelope. She wanted someone who would not be tempted to keep what was not theirs, she said. She wanted honesty and humility. She believed that trust should be returned to the person who honored it. The bell above the door jingled again, somewhere far away. Outside, the city went on with the small business of living. Inside the shop, the folder sat between us like a holding place for the rest of the story. I could not yet know what lay beyond the envelope, or whether the number sewn into the key, 304, meant a safe deposit box or a room or anything at all. The word confianza on the metal plate glowed in my mind like a small star. Trust. When Donna Clara finally unfolded the paper, the next sound in the shop was the scraper of a chair. She read a few words aloud, and when she reached the place that named a box, a bank, or perhaps a chest, her hands gave the smallest tremor. I watched her, and somewhere in the back of me something clicked, like a lock when it finds its key. There was more to be said, more to be asked, There would be the bank, the manager, a vault, rules that smelled of ink and security. There would be choices to make about how to use whatever was there if the key opened the door. For now, sitting at the old table, with the sun cutting the shop into a chessboard pattern, I felt the world become more complicated and more generous at once. I left the shop carrying a weight that was less about the metal in my pocket and more about the shape of the future. The key, in its cloth, warmed against my side as if already anxious to do its work. I thought of Geraldo waiting at home, of Senor Almeida's letters, of the neighbor who had lent the cake plate and the way small debts had grown over years. My hands were steady, my heart was not. The street before me felt like a ribbon I could follow or cut. I had chosen to go back when I could have stayed away. I had asked for an answer, and there were steps left that could not be taken without facing people who kept their power in pinched envelopes and polite words. There would be the bank with its polished counters, the manager with his crisp tie, and a room that smelled of metal and old money. There would be questions of identity and ownership, and whether a test designed by someone who had everything in life could be a bridge to someone who had little. I folded my list in my pocket. I thought of the purse on my kitchen table, patient like an old friend. I thought of the way Geraldo had looked at me, and the way he would sit smaller if the answer was nothing. I thought of Sandra, and her small excellence, and how she had laughed like the world would never press her down. I walked home under a sky that was not yet decided. The key hummed against my thigh, and every step forward felt like a careful hope. The key hummed against my thigh, and every step forward felt like a careful hope. At home, Geraldo was in the doorway, drying his hands on a dish towel as if he'd been waiting all morning to hear what I would say. I let him look at the key there on the table, not yet telling him everything Donna Clara had hinted at. His fingers brushed mine when he reached out to hold it. And for a moment the room was just the two of us and that small cooling metal between our palms. "We'll go together," he said, and his voice was steady in a way that surprised me, steady like someone who has learned to stand in a wind and not be blown off his feet. I believed him. We had made decisions together for years. To tighten our belts one month, to celebrate another month with beans and rice made like a feast. I trusted him more than any paper could promise. We dressed in our best simple clothes. I wore the cardigan I'd mended by the elbow, the one that still had the faint smell of the soap Geraldo preferred. He put on a shirt without holes and ironed the collar as if neatness could change the world. We walked slowly, like people who knew the route but wanted to keep each other in sight. The street smelled of frying oil and the green citrus that a vendor was chopping into little wedges. The bank was not a place we frequented often. When you live with scarce money, banks feel like theaters you might not be cast in. The one in our neighborhood had high glass windows that reflected the sky and men in suits who wore their ease like a second skin. The air inside felt different, cool, with a hush that asked you to be careful with your shoes and your words. At the entrance, a security guard checked our IDs. He looked at us with the civilized distance of someone who sees worry every day and knows when to let it pass or when to hold it at the door. We waited on the numbered bench. People moved in a precise choreography around us. Paperwork slid across counters, pens clicked, keyboards hummed. There was a short, precise sound to the place, like the tick of a clock that measures things you do not yet own. When it was our turn, a young woman directed us to a manager's office. The manager, a man with a tie knotted like a finished sentence, introduced himself with a firm hand and an even smile. He listened while I told the story as simply as I could. The purse, the thrift shop, the key, the plate with confianza, and the number 304. I did not speak with dramatics. We had never been people to wrap our lives in rhetoric. I spoke like someone recounting how rain soaked a shirt, plainly, with what happened next left for them to interpret. He raised an eyebrow at the number. "Box 304, he repeated, and his fingers found the ledger typed into the bank system. Behind him, the room's doors closed, and a faint scent of polish rose. "We'll need identification," he said, "and authorization." Donna Clara had told me there would be an authorization. She had handed me, when I left the shop, an envelope that felt like a small world, a card with Antonietta's name and a folded slip that named the box and the bank branch, and under the wax seal a short note from Antonietta herself stating her wish, that whoever found the key and returned it would be considered the rightful recipient. Donna Clara had explained that Ms. Antonietta had left instructions with her to release the contents under those conditions. The manager took the card, read the note, and studied me with the kind of attention a person gives to a fragile vase. He asked for my identification and for a signature to confirm I was the one who had returned the key. All this was ordinary, the paperwork of law and habit. Yet, as papers slid across the desk and stamps were checked, there was an undertone of something else. Curiosity, perhaps? Or the improbable feeling of being in the middle of someone's deliberate kindness. There were questions. The bank asked how we were related to Antonietta. We answered truthfully, no relation we could claim. We explained the key's discovery, Donna Clara's role, the note. The manager made phone calls, consulted ledgers, wrote in small, careful handwriting. At one point, he excused himself and returned with another employee who carried a box of aged documents. They compared dates, signatures, and the loose ends of a life left behind. Formalities are a kind of slow gait. You wait and hope the key really fits. While the checks were being made, Geraldo looked at me the way a man does when he is trying to keep his feelings small so they will not tip into loudness. I watched him watch the manager, and I saw him imagine the door of possibility behind that office, a door that could open onto a porch where you did not count every penny. When the manager finally nodded, it felt like the room's air had shifted. He told us there was indeed a safety deposit box registered with the bank in Antonietta's name, and that, under special last will instructions and verification of the key's origin through Donna Clara's attestation, the bank would allow access. "These checks are strict," he said. "We must be sure. Ms. Antonietta was very particular." His tone had the respect people give to those who guard their lives with care. They escorted us down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of metal, and that old bank smell, a clean scent edged with ink and time. We passed a door with a brass sign that read "Vault," and descended a small flight of steps into a room that had the hush of things kept safe. The vault itself was a room of steel shelves and small doors, each with numbers like little promises. A bank employee walked with careful fingers over the rows until they found 304. The metal door was cooler to the touch than anything we had known that day. When the key slid in and turned, it made a small, satisfying click that sounded extremely loud in that narrow, polished space, as if every object in the room leaned in to listen. When the drawer opened, the sight of what was inside took my breath in a way I did not expect. There were small velvet pouches, a wooden box, neat stacks of envelopes. For a moment, before my eyes adjusted, I registered the familiar shapes, things I had glimpsed in a jeweler's shop window years ago and had learned to name in passing. A chain here, a brooch there. But alongside jewelry were documents, a sealed envelope stamped with Antonietta's crest, and a smaller packet of cash, folded like a compact fan. The envelopes made my fingers go light. I felt the pull of years and decisions, and a life that had chosen to hide resources where hands that deserved them might find them. The jewelry was not ostentation. It was careful, dignified pieces that looked as if they had been chosen to be worn with simple clothes and steady posture. The cash was an amount that solved many small problems and left room for a foundation, not for ostentatious piles. The papers included, among other things, deeds and a small list of accounts and a letter from Antonietta requesting that the finder use what was necessary for restoration and to care for the community in modest ways. Donna Clara had warned that Antonietta did not want a spectacle. The letter I read aloud later, in a voice that trembled then steadied, reflected that. She wrote about trust as work, about not testing people to make them suffer, but to discover who would choose honesty over easy gain. She said, in the small way people with means sometimes say hard things to those who have less, that dignity is kept by what we do for others with the resources we find. She left instructions for modest expenditures, for paying debts, for medicines, for the purchase of a small home if needed, and for supporting certain neighborhood causes she had named in the list. She wanted no fanfare, she wanted quiet justice. When we closed the deposit box, the air around us felt both heavier and lighter, as if something old had been rearranged so it could hold new life. The manager, who had been by turns careful and now slightly softened, said, "Ms. Mariette, the contents were placed there by Ms. Antonietta with specific instructions. We will help you transfer access." There were more forms, signatures, and the bank's small, polite bureaucracy to navigate, an account setup, verification, a slowly unfolding series of steps that made me grateful for ink and stamps and people who keep their rules. Walking out of the bank into the sunlight felt like crossing from one weather to another. Geraldo laughed softly, a sound I had not heard in a long time, and I felt something like the first time we had said yes to each other, the echo of that promise. On the way home we bought a few ordinary things: medicine for my knee, a proper pair of shoes for Geraldo that fit without the toes pinched, a chicken for dinner instead of the small portion we had been trimming for months. Each purchase was a soft resurrection of normalcy. But we were careful, as Antonietta had asked. We did not rush to make grand announcements. We sat at the table that night with the old lace cloth and a meal that tasted of a home being settled. We paid Senor Almeida the overdue part of rent he had threatened with his notes. The way he took the money felt like someone taking back a debt rather than handing out mercy. He grunted something that may have been gratitude, or perhaps only the satisfaction of business concluded. We fixed the leaky roof little by little with a neighbor who knew how to patch tin. We went to the doctor and got the medicine that eased my knee, and I found I could walk the stairs without counting each step. Within weeks we found a modest house for sale, a small place on a quiet street with a courtyard and a front step that caught the morning sun. We bought it not to show, but to rest. The house was modest, the kind that remembers the sound of people living rather than the gleam of a showroom. We invited the neighbor who had lent us the cake plate and asked if she would keep planting a little herb garden by our kitchen window. She smiled in a way that was not pity, but the welcome that comes between neighbors who have been in the same weather. Sandra heard. Of course she heard. News travels in a neighborhood with the same speed as gossip and the same lack of mercy. She came by one morning, all composed and glossy, as if her shoes were instructions on how the world should look. I was baking a new kind of bread then, one I had learned to make with different flour but the same care. She walked into the small yard and said the words that had always wrapped tight around her like a second collar. "So this is the new house?" she said, with that practiced look that tried to measure what it might do to the edges of her life. For a moment I expected, as part of some script I had rehearsed in my head during sleepless nights, that she would demand an explanation or throw the news like a hand grenade. Instead, she lifted her chin and said simply, "Well, congratulations." Her congratulations was thin, but it was a start. She did not ask how we had obtained the funds, and I did not volunteer the story. There was a chance for embarrassment there, for the past to be paraded, and we had chosen humility over spectacle. Later she did admit in a quieter, almost private way that she had misread the gift in the beginning. She had learned, in ways I could not have forced upon her, that generosity can be complicated, and the world's judgments are often too heavy on those least prepared for them. We did not make a scene, there was no public shaming. We refused to trade dignity for satisfaction. We kept the purse, not sealed or locked away, but cleaned and placed on a small shelf near the kitchen window where the light could fall on its worn leather. It became a thing of memory, not of wealth. Sometimes I would touch its strap when I was thinking about how far we had come. It is easy to pretend that objects transform people, but it is the choices one makes with what comes that shows the measure of heart. We used only what was necessary at first. We paid the old debts, made sure there would be medicine in the cabinet, and put aside a small fund for emergencies. We followed Antonietta's request to help a few causes she named in her papers, small contributions to the soup kitchen and to repair the school roof, modest actions so the blessing went outward. Months passed in the quiet manner that real life makes changes, a steady accumulation of small tasks completed, small joys multiplied. I taught Geraldo how to plant rosemary in the courtyard. He showed me how to fix a stubborn tap. Our neighbors began to drop by with pies and small news. The little house required attention, paint on the front door, a loose step fixed, so there was work that kept us involved and humbled. We never forgot what it meant to choose wisely. Sometimes, at night, when the house was still and the lights in the street were the kind that kept the world honest, I would read Antonietta's letter again. Her handwriting was particular, with small, firm strokes, and in it was an explanation that felt less an instruction than a conversation across time. She wrote about having watched a neighborhood from a distance, seeing the ways people bowed to shame or rose from it. She wanted to reward the person who returned what was not theirs, trusting that simple honesty would lead to larger stewardship. She wrote about trust as both a test and a gift. I thought often about that phrase, confianza. Trust is a fragile instrument. Once broken, it is hard to repair. Antonietta had put trust, literal and symbolic, into the hands of someone who had the humility to return a found object. In doing so, she had shifted something small and private into the public life of our family. It was a lesson we felt as much as we understood, that integrity was more valuable than a quick headline, and kindness measured in the ways we manage new resources mattered most. There were also quieter reckonings. People who had looked at us with thin condescension began in time to look differently. Not because we shouted our fortune, but because our life simply fit better in the neighborhood now. It did not scare them or threaten them. Some people who had treated us with polite distance softened. We were not heroes, we were neighbors who happened to have been given a chance and chose to use it carefully. There were moments when I still felt the old shame, like a smell that sometimes reasserts itself. On those nights, Geraldo would make coffee and sit beside me. We would talk in the soft way couples talk when the world has been unkind and a little kindness arrives, not with fireworks but with warm mugs and slow words. "We must not let this change our regard for others," he would say, and I would nod. He did not mean we should be poor again. He meant we should be aware of how fragile luck can be and how easy it is for fortune to become arrogance. We would laugh then at our younger selves, who had believed in grand gestures, and at the same time be grateful for the small, careful life we had built. Once, months after the bank and the house, we returned to the thrift shop. Donna Clara was sweeping the same corner, humming a tune like someone who keeps her own music for the time she wants to remember. She looked up, and the two of us stood there a little awkwardly, because gratitude is not always easy to hold. We told her what we had done with the money and how we had followed Antonietta's wishes. She nodded as if she had not been surprised at all. She knew, she said simply, and there was a tiny smile in the corner of her mouth, like someone who plants a seed and then looks to see how it flowers. There was something else. After a while, Sandra stopped pretending her life's measures were the only way to be. She began, in slow increments, to be kinder in the small ways. She left a bag of flour at our door once when she had more than she needed. Another time she brought by a casserole without making an announcement. Perhaps she had felt ashamed of her earlier meanness, or perhaps she had simply seen that the rhythm of the world could be gentler. Whatever the reason, the change was welcome. I do not tell this story to make anyone feel guilty for how they live. Life is full of complicated things and people. We all carry weights. I tell it because there are moments when the things we dismiss as trash turn out to be keys, literally or figuratively, and they ask us to choose. We chose honesty. We chose to remember where we had come from. We chose to give back. And that choice changed our mornings as much as our afternoons. There were practical matters to attend to, taxes and paperwork, the careful sorting of an estate. The bank and a lawyer handled some of it, with a steady professionalism that made the process feel like a machine built to put pieces in order. We did not keep everything. We paid off what was urgent and set up an account that would remain modest, a reserve for when storms came. We made sure the money was not a rope to hang our pride on, but a tool to stitch a better life and to help others. Years have a way of softening edges. Looking back now, I can see how each decision was like a stitch in a quilt. Alone they mean little, but together they keep you warm. The purse sits on its shelf still, its leather smoother in ways that make it look like an old friend. It is not a trophy, we are careful about that, but it is a reminder that people are more than the shoes they wear or the meals they eat. That dignity can be restored with prudence and grace. Sometimes I am asked if I regret not telling the whole story at once, if I regret hiding the key at first and waking Geraldo with what might have been. I do not regret it. That night I chose to protect him from hope that could have been taken away. I chose to be the person who would see what was in the purse and think through the consequences. That too is a kind of love, the choice to be careful with another person's heart. People sometimes want a moral at the end of such stories. I will offer none in the way of a sermon. Instead, I will say this. There are acts that seem small. Returning a found thing, wiping an old purse with a cloth, not answering a jibe with a shout. Those small things are not small in the ways that matter. Honesty is an act that can rearrange a life. Humility does not make you weak. It makes you fit for things that require steadiness. And trust? Confianza, once given and honored, can open doors that no amount of showmanship ever could. If you ask me what I would have done if I were standing where Antonietta stood, I don't know. I only know what we did. We honored the request, we tended to our neighborhood, and we used what came with care. We did not let the blessing harden into a weapon or a show. There are mornings now when I sit by the window with a cup of coffee and let the light move across the lace cloth. Geraldo tends the rosemary, humming under his breath, and sometimes we watch the world go by with a kind of restful attention. The neighborhood still has its complexities, people still judge and sometimes misunderstand. But there is also laughter, and neighbors who borrow sugar and return it with a story. We have chosen to live modestly, with gratitude, and to keep the purse as a reminder that life sometimes hides its most important gifts in the smallest places. What would you have done if you found a hidden key? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.